All right, a second set of arguments, popular in Washington mostly, Moscow somewhat, Palo Alto not so much, is that this is the result of Western policies, right? It's our fault. It's our fault. And it comes in two varieties that are diametrically opposed to each other. I want to take both of them on. The first is that we did too much. We pushed the Russians into this, right? We lectured them about how they had to be more democratic. We expanded NATO when they didn't want that to happen. We bombed Serbia. We invaded Iraq. That created tensions with Russia. And then we supported color revolutions that were against Russia's interest. And then we supported revolutions in the Arab Spring just a couple of years ago. And so it was our pushing that just compelled Putin to invade Ukraine. Now, I said it too flippantly. There's something that's true about this argument. There's no doubt that it created a narrative that was useful for Putin when he finally decided to go into Ukraine. And if you watch Russian TV today, you're going to hear about NATO and Nazis, right? NATO Nazis, NATO Nazis, NATO Nazis. Those two N-words are on every television program now, portraying their battle in Ukraine as a battle of Russia against the West, and the two symbolic things associated with the West for Russians in an antagonistic way, NATO and Nazis. The problem with this theory is that when I was in government, especially in the first few years of the Obama administration, we had a different relationship with Russia. A policy called the reset, if you may remember, that it started well before we won office. I worked for the president for 2 years before he became president. And as we got ready to go into office, we did a policy review of everything, and I was in charge of the Russia policy review. And we sat down with the president and talked about, we just had this conflict with Georgia, Russia-Georgian war had just happened. Things were pretty tense in 2008 between the United States and Russia. And President Obama looked at this and he said, I don't get it. When I look around the world and I see where we have vital national security interests, I don't understand why Russia doesn't have the same interests. Does Russia have an interest in Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon? No, was his assessment. So we should be able to cooperate on that. Does Russia want al-Qaeda and the Taliban to win in Afghanistan? No. So why can't we cooperate on that? Does Russia want the security regimes, the arms control regimes that have been in place for decades to fall apart, that provide stability, and even in just providing inspections, provides kind of stability between our two countries? His answer was no. Is it in Russia's and America's national interest to increase trade and investment between our two countries? His answer was no. And therefore, we embarked on a different policy where we tried to frame issues in win-win outcomes with Russia, not in zero-sum terms, and not as an ideological struggle between democracy and autocracy. And we had real achievements. A lot got done. We got the START Treaty done. We got the new sanctions on Iran. We developed something you've probably never heard of, the Northern Distribution Network, which supplies and now will be a conduit for getting people out and material out of Afghanistan. When we came into government, there was just a trickle of supplies, and it goes through Russia all the way. It gets on stuff in Virginia and goes all the way on railways through Russia, through Central Asia and into Afghanistan. At the peak of it, it was over 55% of our supply routes went through Russia in this cooperative way. American soldiers flew through Russia for the first time since World War II. And I would just remind you how important that was, because the southern route went through Pakistan. And as we went through some very difficult phases in our relationship with Pakistan, including, of course, the operation against Osama bin Laden, had we relied on them for 95% of our supplies, we might have had to think differently about that particular operation. So this is cooperation that didn't happen 30 years ago or 120 years ago. This is just 2 or 3 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago. So something that happened 20 years ago cannot explain the conflict now if just 2 or 3 years ago we were cooperating. By the way, at the peak of our cooperation, public opinion in Russia put approval rating of our country at 65%. That was just 3 years ago. So something else had to happen, right? This was not inevitable.